Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Corey Search, and I'm a regional long-term care ombudsman for with Land of Sky. And Tim, are you hearing feedback from me?
You sound just fine.
Okay, perfect. We are here to speak with Tim Lane, who is a long-term care. Who is a long-term care administrator with Henderson County, and he is going to give us some insight and some information about long-term care and the LGBTQ community. We are part of Rainbow Inspirations, which is part of Generation Plus, which is affiliated with Blue Ridge Pride. So, Mr. Lane, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you so much, Corey. It's good to be here.
Good. So, Tim, let's give everyone just a little bit of your background in general, how long you've been in long-term care and what made you go into long-term care.
Sure. Thank you, Corey. I would first like to express my sincere appreciation for being here today and for all these wonderful people that I've met recently. Corey Search, yourself, of course, Rebecca Chaplin, the organization's Rainbow Inspiration, which I think is awesome, Gen Plus, which is an excellent idea. It's probably something that's been on the table for many years, and finally it's come to fruition, even here in Western North Carolina. I want to express my appreciation to Blue Ridge Pride and AARP and Butch Out for having me here today. Butch Thompson, of course, is one of my very dear friends, and I'm happy to be able to be prompted a little bit by his guidance on this interview. I have been an administrator and an executive director in long-term health care now for 35 years. I'm actually part of the LGBTQ community as well as the Gen Plus community. So I'm happy to hopefully share a little bit of insight into kind of long-term healthcare and healthcare in general these days. I started back in the 80s. I went to school at Virginia Tech and then the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and went to work in Greensboro, North Carolina, and then spent about 20 years in Atlanta. And I'm back here in Asheville for the last 6 years, currently at Universal Healthcare of Fletcher. My passion for long-term care has actually strengthened and grown over the last few years. And one of the things that might be interesting to talk about today is the routine residents that I often encounter who are actually members of the LGBTQ community who have to, for one reason or another, enter long-term care or institutional settings. And I think it can be quite a change. And as my partner, Jeff Bartlett, put it the other day, it's a return to vulnerability. And I think that's something that needs to be talked about. And I'm happy to have this setting here to help explain a few things that, Corey, I think you had some questions about.
I do. For those that aren't really aware about long-term care or LTC, can you give just a little bit of background about long-term care in general, and when someone enters long-term care, what's expected? What is daily life like?
Sure. Great question, Corey. I think it may be important to talk about sort of the types of residents that I see in long-term care. And I actually kind of see two different types of people. In my current facility, I have a long-term care wing and I have a rehab wing. In the long-term care wing, the types of people that we see are people who've had strokes, maybe people with Alzheimer's disease, and general aging issues like failure to thrive or congestive heart failure, diabetes, those kinds of things, those long-term chronic issues. And I have an example of that. One of my very dear friends recently called me and she said, my mom simply can't live at home anymore. Her home flooded out and I don't know what to do. She can't live alone. She can't live with me. And it was a panic situation. So I told my friend, I said, bring her to me. Just bring her here. We'll figure it out. We'll go down that road. And so that was just a couple of months ago. And at this point, my friend's mother is a long-term care resident. She's simply frail and not able to live alone, and she's very happy here. And the staff adores her. She's become part of the family, basically. So she's probably going to be here for a while, and I'm thrilled to have her. Now, in my rehab wing, and this may be the thing that people are most interested in, right now, for example, I have a lady who she's 66 and she was in a car accident. She vividly tells me about running into the back of a car, and then she skidded off the road and went down an embankment. And it's this very scary story, certainly an accident. She didn't mean to do it, but here she is with several broken bones and a slow recovery. You know, at 66 or 75, we don't always recover as quickly as a whippersnapper. So my average length of stay in my rehab unit is 26 days. We consider that short term. Now, my resident, Miss G, considers that a lifetime because she's got an active life. She has a lot going on. But unfortunately, her recovery is going to be kind of slow. So she's working with physical therapy, occupational therapy, letting those bones heal. And we're hoping to have her out of here, hopefully by the end of the month and back home. So those are other types of patients we see. Another resident that I enjoy talking about has become a very good friend of mine. This gentleman, he's 92, and I had no idea really that he was part of the LGBTQ community until I just started noticing. He's very neat and tidy. He loves to watch shows about live theater performances. He loves the symphony. He loves artistic expression. And just the kind of things that might make another gay man raise an eyebrow. So the more I got to know this fella, he said, "There's something I want to tell you." And I said, "Okay, what is that?" And he said, quietly, "I've never kissed a girl." I said, "Mr. Keeney, you're safe here. You're safe with me, and it's okay. We're going to continue to move through life together." So there's some examples of some of the residents I see in long-term care. Some are here for 26 days. Some are here and they've moved in to live out the rest of their lives.
Tim, let me ask you something, because you made two statements that actually segue into a couple of other things, but you said they become part of the family, which really, when you move into a facility, especially a long-term care facility, you're there for so many people. So it does become like a family, but also the return to vulnerability, which is something that, talking about the LGBTQ community and being in long-term care, and then sort of some people feel the need to change how they have lived their entire lives or a part of their lives in order to, from residents I've spoken to sort of fit in better. Do you see things like that where people have to sort of pull back or are really not who they once were?
Corey, I think that's a great question. And you as an ombudsman have probably certainly seen this time and time again, like I have. I don't know if it's the generation or the fear, but once somebody goes into a situation where their health has failed them or they've had an accident, they go through the hospital stay, and then they're looking at further continued care, be it home health care or some sort of institutional care. Yes, that's got to be an extremely vulnerable situation. And I know when folks come into long-term care, and I've got about 3 or 4 stories I'd love to tell about that very thing. Not all of them are pleasant. They enter a facility and it's almost like they go back in the closet. I try to put myself in that situation because I can't imagine what that's like. And in long-term care, for example, private rooms are few, and not all insurance payors pay for a private room. So oftentimes we're looking at placing a gay man or woman into a room with another male or female roommate. I would think, for me, that would be extremely uncomfortable. Unfortunately, it can be the reality. I'd like to, as an administrator, I like to get to know those people up front and hopefully identify anyone that may truly need some additional privacy, some additional safety and support mechanisms put in place. And I have an example of that. Just a couple of years ago, I had a referral for a new patient who was coming in for short-term rehabilitation. And the patient and the hospital was able to let us know up front prior to admission that this person was trans. And so with that knowledge, I was able to actually gather my staff together and let them know, look, we have someone coming in to recover from, say, a hip fracture. This person is also transgender. And so I was able to say to my staff, I don't want anybody working with this person who might feel uncomfortable with that situation. I want to give you guys the opportunity to tell me now because I need to know. I only want people working with this person who feel very comfortable that they're here to deal with this person's debility and get them back on their feet. Well, fortunately in that situation, 100% of my staff said, I'll do it. I'll make them feel right at home. We'll take good care of them. And that worked out okay. And for many people, it was their first time dealing with a transgendered human being. So that was an interesting experience. And that person rehabilitated and went home right on schedule. So that's a good story. I also have another example that's taking place right now of a kind of sad situation. This lady, she lived her life with her life partner, and she was basically estranged from her family. As she entered advanced age, dementia started to set in. And when she was no longer able to make decisions for herself, she became institutionalized, and her sister swooped in. And I use that term because it's the accurate description. The sister swooped in and took charge and moved this woman's life partner out of the picture. That's a sad situation, but there was nothing that I could do about it except to advocate for the lady's life partner. I give that example, I think, to say that it's so important for all of us to have advanced directives put in place. And I know, Corey, that you do a number of educational events surrounding advanced directives, but I can't stress enough, particularly for men and women of the LGBTQ community, to have either a healthcare power of attorney appointed or be married. I mean, those are the options we have, especially when there's family members around too. And we never know when we're going to get need for into a situation where we need healthcare, and healthcare providers have to abide by the law. Who's in charge? And if they don't have a piece of paper that says healthcare power of attorney or spouse, then they're turning to family members. And that can be a very uncomfortable situation to be in. I might have gotten off onto a different topic there, Corey, but.
No, I think that's so important for the community at large to know how important advanced directives are, but especially the LGBTQ community, where someone can, like you said, swoop in. A family member can come in and say, nope, this is how it's going to be done, especially for someone who may be living with dementia. And that's so unfair to be changing two lives. So that was actually going to be one of my questions is, what do you recommend in situations like that? So I think knowing how important that paperwork is, although sometimes it seems tedious, is needed as early as possible, not just when you enter into any kind of facility. So no, I appreciate that greatly.
Okay.
I know you had said you had a couple of more stories about presidents. Yes.
I actually sort of made a note of 5 different people here who are near and dear to my heart. Had another resident, and she had also been a former colleague. These stories are not pleasant, but unfortunately, they're the truth. So she was actually a friend of mine and a colleague, and her name was Susan. Susan was estranged from her daughter, and Susan had a car accident. She hit a tree head on. When I went to see Susan in the hospital, she looked like a big blob lying there. It was bad. She was in a coma. Her life partner of 30 years wanted to see her as well. But unfortunately, Susan's daughter, whom she hadn't seen in a dozen years, took control of the situation and prohibited all visitation. So again, there's another situation, but it's a true story. Susan came out of that and she became her old self, and she was able to take care of that paperwork, but it was after the fact. She and her partner are still together, and they now live in Portsmouth, Virginia. And I think they've made up with their daughter too. Another fella, his name was Richard. And this starts out kind of scary. Richard was mostly blind. He was about 78 years old. He had become mostly blind, and he lived with his husband of many years. Richard's husband passed away in their home, and Richard, being blind, didn't know it for a period of time. When Richard discovered it, of course, he panicked and he ran to his neighbor's house. In that situation, Richard's neighbor became his decision maker or his assistant to help him work through the healthcare situation. He was not able to live alone because of his blindness and several other debilities, and his neighbor became the decision maker because all of his family was in Florida. Fortunately, his neighbor was a wonderful lady, and she appeared to make appropriate decisions on his behalf. But there again, Richard had a partner. He had a husband, and it didn't work out because the husband passed away. So in his case, it would have been good to have an additional person put in place to be able to help him maneuver that particular situation. Fast forward, that's been maybe 8 months ago. Richard is now living with his sister in Florida. And the last time I spoke with him, he's very happy. And we talked about the need to have a power of attorney in place in addition to his sister. I know what the next question you're going to ask is the decision-making authority. Advanced directives include an order of authority. Number one, a person who can make all decisions over another person is a legal guardian, and that person is court appointed. There's very unique situations where a person might get appointed a legal guardian, but most of those come down to there's no one else and they have complete inability to make appropriate decisions for themselves. Secondly, in the absence of a guardian, which very few people have, is a power of attorney. So any one of us can appoint a healthcare power of attorney with the signing of a piece of paper in front of a notary public. So it's so simple. You can print the forms offline, go online and look up healthcare power of attorney or durable power of attorney for North Carolina. You can print those off. You can make changes and initial them. You can sign it in front of a notary public and appoint whomever you choose to be your power of attorney. And it's so simple and it's so important. And we generally don't do that until we absolutely need to, which is unfortunate. In the absence of a power of attorney, the next person that a healthcare provider is going to turn to for decision making is going to be a spouse. So fortunately, with the gay community, we now have the opportunity to marry. So I want to encourage that, if not from the point of view of having a beautiful life together, then from the point of view of having somebody to make decisions on your behalf. In the absence of the spouse or healthcare power of attorney, the decision making goes to the majority of the family members of the first degree. And family of the first degree is mother, father, sister, brother, son, and daughter. And for anybody in the LGBTQ community, I think a majority of us do not have children. So that's going to go to our brothers and sisters. And I know in my case, my brother's a pretty decent guy, but he's the last person that I would want making any decisions on my behalf. Yeah, there's some stories there too, but you don't want to hear those.
Tim, let me ask you, for those residents who are coming in to a facility that may be nervous or don't really know what's coming, what can we do as people who either work in the facilities or come in to visit the residents? I know when the ombudsman do any kind of training, we talk about being sure to use the correct pronouns, and calling by the preferred name. What else can be done? What do you see the future being? I know that's probably 4 different questions, but what's your interpretation of what's needed and what's to come?
Corey, if I were actually looking for an advanced placement institutionalization for a family member, I think there's a few things I would look for. One of the things of many would be, does this place have a good relationship with its ombudsman? An ombudsman is a person, as many people might know, that is always an advocate for the resident. Mm-hmm. And for the facility, any facility, to have a good relationship with that ombudsman, what that tells me is that facility has as its priority the well-being of its residents. So that would be one of the many things I think I would look for. It's interesting, I don't call myself an out person. I just don't call myself an in person. So I sometimes will get phone calls from people I had a resident last year who was actually from Charlotte, lived in Charlotte, and he saw me on, I don't know, Facebook or something. He said, I'm going to have surgery and I'm going to need long-term care. I'd like to come to your building. And this fellow actually was in his 70s. He also had an HIV. He was a tender kind of person, and he wanted to feel safe. And so we actually met prior to his coming, and he had done his research, and he was a very gentle man who I detected had lived fear. And now he's in this vulnerable place, and he wanted to know that he had an advocate. So I think it's very, the safety and well-being are my top 2 priorities for my residents, and I think they should be in any setting. So in any way a person could detect safety and well-being from the residents who are there, I think is a good indicator. any facility who invites their ombudsman in to do training on issues such as transgender, LGBTQ, preferred pronouns, like you said, if I have a transgender individual, they do not wish to be called he or him or she or her. And I don't want to insult them by trying to force that upon them. So I think training and education on sensitivity and things that they might encounter in any situation is extremely important. And I really appreciate that Land of Sky and you have been so forward thinking in planning for this type of training. I know Land of Sky has put together several programs for teaching long-term care staff how to address issues related to the LGBTQ community. And I truly appreciate that. I may one day not only work in this community, but I might be a member of the community. So I would want to be somewhere near Corey Search. So
I'm going to remember that. So be careful what you wish for. What do you think? Now going into so many of the long-term care facilities, we have people going in at younger ages. Oh. They're not entering facilities at 70 or 80, stereotypical, but they're going in, sooner. How do you see it changing at all with maybe people being more open and maybe hopefully not feeling that pressure to hide who they may have always been, or do you hopefully maybe not have that type of fear?
That's a great question, Corey. I think we have a long way to go. I think, as my partner Jeff Bartlett said, it's a return to vulnerability anytime we're in a situation where we have to depend on other people for our basic human needs. And so we've got a long way to go to help caregivers understand the need for the sensitivity, especially in the LGBTQ community, because even if this resident we're talking about is 35 or 40 years old, the tendency is to not talk about that. And one of the things that I'll often tell a resident of that age is, look, your insurance company does not care about your sexuality or your preferences or how you choose to live your life. They are looking at your progress and your desire to get better and your progress towards the goals that have been set for you for getting back home. But we're going to help you do that. But sensitivity from the caregivers, I think we've got a long way to go.
Okay. It looked like, here is a question. Are waiting lists a problem for long-term care, especially for lower income folks?
Yes, waiting lists, and that changes depending on the location sometimes and the facility. I think there are probably facilities whose waiting lists are shorter than others. And I think there are places where waiting lists are in terms of a year, even if you're looking at long-term, truly, many people come here at a certain age and they just want to move in. I want to live here. I want to choose this as my new home for the rest of my life. There might be a waiting list for that. And in the places that would accommodate that sort of long-term, then yeah, you might be looking at 1 to 2 years for that kind of a wait. It's a great question.
Great. Tim, we are almost out of time. So I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Absolutely. And I wanted to remind all those who are watching or will be watching that Rainbow Inspirations has their conversations and interviews the first Wednesday of every month at noon. You can go on blueridgepride.org org, Projects Generation Plus. to find out more information. You can also find them on Facebook for more information. But again, Tim, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, thank you.
My pleasure, Corey. Thank you so much.